Welcome back to the Game Change Halloween special. Today we're taking it back to our roots by recreating the same video that began our Game Change adventure when we transformed Fallout 4 into the ultimate horror experience. But, just like the Fallout episode, to make a game scary, we first have to begin with making it look scary. First I began with vanilla Skyrim, then I added the ominous ENB. Next I threw on a few standard texture mods, and then added our weather mod, which for this video is Obsidian Weathers and Seasons. Next we've got the flora to take care of. Skyrim Flora Overhaul was our best option to achieve the gritty look we're going for. The last thing to change was the environment itself, and that's where Dark Forests of Skyrim came into play. And as the name suggests, this mod transforms many of Skyrim's landscapes into dark fantasy forests by adding towering dead trees withering into death. And overall, just makes things pretty darn spooky. So we have our environmental visuals mostly down, but we're not going to stop there. As far as I'm concerned, as much as all these mods can make the overworld look a little more unsettling than your regular playthrough, in order to truly capture the horror spirit we're going for, we need to shut off the lights. Permanently. And that's where the mod simply titled Eternal Night comes into play. And it does exactly what you would expect, shutting off Skyrim's day cycle completely, leaving you in an endless eternal cycle of darkness. But we at least want it to be a little interesting, so I also threw in Moons of Nirn by 𝗛cie𝗿𝗿_𝐿, which allows you to bring a very Bloodborne looking blood moon into your sky to complement the eternal suffering of endless darkness that you've damned yourself to. However, if I kept it nighttime for the entire video, you wouldn't be able to see a single other one of the mods in this episode. So we're going to switch the lights back on for now, and move on to our next section of the video, which is audio. Now the audio in horror games, or just games in general, has a huge part to play in immersing you into the tone of that world. And since we're transforming Skyrim into the next spookiest thing since 𝗛cie𝗿𝗿𝗿, we need to build upon the audio already included in the base game. While there are a few scary themed audio mods such as Skeletons of Daggerfall, we're trying to create a solid playable product here. So having skeletons, although admittedly terrifying, sound like they have an 8-bit audio compressor wedged into their throat. Do skeletons have throats? Either way, audio quality, bad. So we're just going to go for some more atmospheric audio mods. And the first of those is everybody's favourite Skyrim Sounds mod, Sounds of Skyrim. The Skyrim Sounds mod, which makes the sounds of Skyrim sound more like Skyrim should sound. And most of you will already be familiar with this mod, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but for those who aren't, it basically adds a whole bunch of new ambient sounds to the game, which makes everything sound cooler, and equally terrifying when you can barely see 10 feet ahead of you. And as far as the music is concerned, you have a choice of two options here. Either you turn it off completely and let yourself be spooked solely by the environment around you, or you use something like the Yggdrasil music and sound effects overhaul, which not only replaces all of Skyrim's soundtrack with a dark folk Nordic alternative, but also changes many of Skyrim's UI sounds and effects for things like leveling up, discovering new locations, receiving a new quest, that sort of thing. Now that we've got our ambience covered, it's time to cover the gameplay mods of the video. Now just like the Fallout episode, the gameplay is key to actually making the game scary. If you just make the game look spooky, but in your head you still know that behind that thin veneer, the core gameplay is still normal Skyrim, you won't stay spooked for very long. So with all these next set of mods, I've tried to bring a more critical, dire experience to Skyrim that will bring a huge amount of weight to your game, in turn, making it as close to a horror game as possible. To achieve this, we need to take a look at, well, pretty much any horror game ever. The thing that makes a horror game so horrific is the fact that the player is pretty much hopeless against the enemy of the game. I use this example in my Fallout video, but look at Alien Isolation. The first half of the game is pretty terrifying. You have nothing to defend yourself aside your own stealth, meaning you are shitting it just about every time you hear anything move. and then fast forward a couple of hours and you're running around without a care in the world, shooting a flamethrower at everything that even looks remotely alive. So how do we keep the main core of Skyrim the same while also achieving this lonesome, horrifying experience? Well, it all comes down to a few things. First, we need to make pretty much every enemy a threat to the player's life. Then we need to actually balance that so you don't rage quit within seconds. And then we need to completely unbalance it again by throwing some permadeath in. So let's begin with the first step, making the enemies a threat. Some of this will be covered in the creatures we add in the next section, but we also need to affect everything else. So for this I'm using a combination of Moraloot Ultimate, then we're using higher level enemies, which is a mod which adds over 874 new enemy variants to every enemy type in the game, and finally a classic of game change, Wildcat, which also leads us on to our next mod, Skyrim Souls, Unpaused Game Menu. This mod does exactly what you would expect by the name, and it makes it so when you bring up any type of menu, being it your inventory, magic, quests or settings, time will continue to pass as usual outside the menu. This adds that weight to our game that we're going to need if we're going to be genuinely scared. Next, as we briefly touched upon before, to bring the most amount of weight to your game, you're going to want some dire consequences to actually be afraid of. So how about if you die, your entire save file gets deleted? Apart from physically lighting your computer on fire, I think that's just about as extreme as we can get. So I'm also using Dead is Dead by Sagittarius22, which will cover that entire system. And finally is a bit of a larger gameplay overhaul which aims to bring some features into Skyrim straight from everybody's favourite nostalgic horror game, Amnesia. Survive the Night is a mod which after initiating makes it so whenever the sun goes down, the darkness acts as the enemy itself. The longer you spend out in the dead of night without a light, the more your sanity weakens. And at the extremes, you can start to hallucinate and go insane, causing apparitions to summon around you that you'll have to fight in order to survive. Although to everybody else, what you're actually doing is just flailing your sword around at nothing like a crazy person. Oh, and by the way, we're also using the alternate start Robbed and Left 4 Dead beginning, just in case it wasn't clear that we weren't going to begin our horror game on a carriage ride to Helgen. So now we've got our core visuals, audio, and gameplay of our horror game in place, now we need to begin by adding in our threats, because you need things to be scared of to actually be scared. This is where our creatures come in, and we have quite a few. First we have the cannibal Draugr on Solstheim, which in its original form is a mod designed to change the Draugr found in the Dragonborn DLC to adhere to the original lore reflecting their eternal cannibalism described in the Elder Scrolls 3 Blood Moon expansion, and this will be more significant a little later on. Next is creepy zombies, which adds many horrifying corpses to the game that lurk around cemeteries, wetlands and forests. The Pyramid Head, a physical manifestation of an incorporeal type of Daedra called the Living Nightmare. The Cursed Child's Doll, a poltergeist created from fear and anger that commonly possesses objects that are tied to these emotions upon death. Ghouls, which are small Daedra who roam dungeons and feed upon dead corpses. Zombie dogs, skinned hounds that serve as mindless guards to their lairs. Barghests and hellhounds, dark spirits from the Deadlands appearing in canine form. The Samaria, murdered by the lust of a cruel imperial captain, destined to seek revenge on those she feels resemble the traits of her killer. Foglings, goblin-like creatures who lurk in the mist serving higher vampire beings and those whose paths are tied to Cold Harbour. Gravelords, immensely powerful undead beings of the void, the representation of the primordial states of emptiness and chaos. The Hymn, an eternal evil entity, a parasite that latches itself to the guilt or lust of its victim. Classic ghosts. They're from Oblivion. Wendigos and Howlers, the manifestation of Hircine and Molag Bal, savage unnatural creatures that will seek to devour those who mean to intrude on their territory. Necrophages, plague-ridden servants of Nymeria that come in the form of rot fiends, scurvers, and bulvors. Vampire beasts, a variety of bloodthirsty cousins to their more human vampiric counterparts. And finally, wraiths, corrupted souls bound to the mortal plane by unfinished business, stripped of all memories and sense of self, but left with only pain, anger, and guilt. With each one of these creatures lurking around your world, I can assure you, you'll have no problem finding a reason to be terrified. Some are more dangerous than others, but all pose a threat with the new gameplay systems we introduced earlier. Creatures make up a big part of any game change, and that's no exception here. But while they are important, they can only go so far if the world they inhabit isn't suited to the horror theme alongside them. First of all, we're going to add the most game-changing mod into our game, and then work on the smaller changes. While many of the things we've added thus far are great changes and additions, the game still very much feels like Skyrim. And I mean, it should, we're playing Skyrim, but we can do better than that. 𝗛cie𝗿𝗿 is a mod which aims to throw a wrench into the core gameplay loop of what it means to be an RPG by absolutely ravaging the entire world with an outbreak of the undead. In this mod there are many different modes that can be applied, but for this build, we're choosing the Aftermath scenario, where you are spawned into an already horrified world, now overtaken by the undead plague. No city is safe, no landscape a safe haven. Corpses are littered through the streets, some dead, some are risen again. 𝗛cie𝗿𝗿 completely turns our game upside down, and strips away almost every comfort that could be afforded to us within this experience. The world is now truly a deathly horrifying world, that's most dangerous areas are now those you would have originally thought would be safe. And with our Cannibal 𝗛cie𝗿𝗿 mod enabled, it makes it all the more terrifying. Now sticking to our world theme, we're going to add on a mod that helps give you the feeling of claustrophobia while traversing Skyrim's marshes. Simply titled The Marshlands, this mod aims to transform Skyrim's marshes into a flooded vista, shrouded by dead trees and bushes, and adds a few particularly unsettling areas such as spider-infested forests and drowned villages. Similar to the Dark Forest of Skyrim mod earlier, this completes all our additions to Skyrim's marshes, and leaves them feeling like the terrifying haunting swamps that we want them to be. And now for our final addition to the world before we get into the last mod of the video. As many of the above ground is now savaged by a 𝗛cie𝗿𝗿 infestation, alongside horrifying ghouls and monsters we added earlier, travelling across this plane, especially with permadeath enabled, is a horrifying and quite frankly terrible idea. So we need another way to get around Skyrim, and that's where Skyrim Underground comes into play. If you've never heard of this mod before, it's one of the largest, if not the largest, dungeon mods for Skyrim Special Edition. And it's not just a new dungeon with loot to find, but more importantly, especially for this list, is a gigantic tunnel system that spreads across the entire face of Skyrim, allowing you to navigate across the world from different entry points on the surface, serving as your most safe way to travel from one side of Skyrim to another. But it's not completely safe. Yes, it might not be the horrific mosh pit of death that litters in the overworld, but Skyrim Underground doesn't lack in its own introduction of monsters and other deadly threats to watch out for while traversing its tunnels. It comes with its own massive list of new undead creatures that you will encounter within the depths of its tunnels, and now, it's just up to you to decide which fate is your best chance at survival. Now, the main bulk of this Halloween game change is complete. Our world is cold and harsh, our visuals and sounds are horrific and terrifying, but there has to be a goal to our playthrough, something to aim to complete. This isn't a see how long you can survive type of build, but a see if you can survive type of build, which means we need a quest mod to provide our purpose across our deadly world. Something short enough to be completable with this permadeath build, but something spooky enough to fit with the theme. And that's where Undeath comes into play. Undeath is a mod that has been around for what seems like a very long time, and for some reason, I never got around to playing it. This mod takes you on a journey to uncover the mystery of a powerful necromancer that seeks to find the forbidden secrets of immortality. It leads you to the peaks of the Dragontail Mountains to seek out the horrific deeds the necromancer has committed, and unveil his plans for an unholy ritual. The mod is the perfect length to provide a reasonable purpose to our game, and provides the perfect tone and ending if you make it there, to be the closing chapter to this game change experience. With all these mods in today's video, we've completely transformed Skyrim into a horrific, harsh world, ready to punish you at every turn. You're not the mighty Dragonborn here to slay everything and anything. You are the prey, and that's exactly what we need if we're going to turn this 10-year-old fantasy RPG into a deathly, blistering horror game in 2020. And while we close out this video, I want to remind you, no matter how horrific and deadly we make Skyrim, no matter how many times we throw our controllers at the wall in rage from permadeath, nothing, and I mean nothing, can at least be worse than 2020. Adios, bitches.